The desert keeps its secrets buried deep hidden beneath layers of sand and history that most are content to leave undisturbed. But some truths refuse to remain silent. In the harsh New Mexico Badlands, where frontier justice once reigned and legends were born in blood, the past isn't dead. It's merely waiting. They say Billy the Kid died at Fort Sumner in 1881, shot through the heart by Pat Garrett's bullet. History books closed. The chapter monuments were built, and powerful men constructed legacies on that single night of frontier justice. But what if the most famous death in Western history was the greatest lie ever told? Some secrets are worth killing for. Others are worth dying to protect. And in the forgotten corners of Lincoln County, both the desperate and the powerful will stop at nothing to control a truth that's been waiting 140 years to be told. The year was 2023 when Sarah Blackwood stood on the worn wooden steps of the county courthouse, clutching a manila folder containing the deed to Rancho Escondido. At 38, this Marine Corps veteran and single mother of two had gambled her entire savings on 200 acres of sun-baked adobe and crumbling outbuildings that locals seemed strangely eager to avoid. "It's officially ours now," she told her children, Thomas and Emma, mustering confidence she didn't entirely feel. What she couldn't know was that beneath those weathered floorboards lay not just a home, but a historical mystery that would challenge the very foundations of American frontier mythology. The woman who discovered Billy the Kid's secret tunnel, April 2, 1923, settled upon the New Mexico high desert with its characteristic temperament, days of intense clarifying sunshine, punctuated by sudden violent windstorms, that locals recognized as the desert's way of reminding them who truly ruled these lands. In the small town of Diablo Springs, population 1, 842 residents moved with the practiced rhythm of generations: when to plant, when to harvest, how to read the capricious desert weather from cloud formations that outsiders dismissed as mere scenery. Sarah Blackwood stood on the worn wooden steps of the county courthouse, clutching a manila folder containing paperwork that represented her greatest gamble. At 38, her face retained the striking beauty that had turned heads during her military service. Those sleepless nights and financial stress had etched fine lines around her gray-green eyes. Her dark hair, cut in a practical shoulder-length style that required minimal maintenance, was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and her posture still reflected the military bearing that 12 years in the Marines had instilled. Next to her stood her children, 13-year-old Thomas, already showing the lanky height that would eventually surpass her own, and 9-year-old Emma, whose boundless energy made standing still for any length of time a heroic achievement. Both children watched their mother with a mixture of excitement and apprehension that mirrored her own conflicted emotions. "So it's officially ours now, Mom?" Thomas asked, his voice carrying the first hints of adolescent change as he stared at the folder in Sarah's hands. "It is," she answered, mustering a confidence she didn't entirely feel. 200 acres of ranch house and outbuildings that have seen better days. All ours. What she didn't say aloud was how terrifyingly little remained in her bank account after this purchase. The property had been surprisingly, suspiciously affordable, sold at a county tax auction for less than a quarter of what comparable properties in the area commanded. The listing agent had been remarkably vague about its history, mentioning only that it had been abandoned for nearly 15 years following the previous owner's death and subsequent tax delinquency. "When can we see it again?" Emma bounced on her toes, her face alight with the adventure of it all. "Right now," Sarah replied, ruffling her daughter's hair. "Let's go to see our new home." Those words, "our new home," carried the weight of 4 years of transience following her medical discharge from the Marine Corps. 4 years of temporary apartments, of couch surfing with increasingly impatient relatives, of explaining to her children why they couldn't put posters on walls or adopt a pet. 4 years of watching her savings dwindle as she struggled with the chronic pain that had ended her military career and complicated civilian employment. The drive to their new property took 30 minutes along increasingly narrow and winding roads that branched away from Diablo Springs' modest Main Street. Sarah's aging Ford Explorer navigated the bumpy terrain as she mentally cataloged what little she knew about their new home. Locals called it Rancho Escondido, the hidden ranch, after the natural depression in the landscape that kept it invisible from the main road until you were almost upon it. Built sometime in the 1880s, the ranch house had been expanded haphazardly over decades, resulting in an architectural hodgepodge that spoke of utility rather than aesthetics. As they turned onto the gravel driveway that cut through their newly acquired 200 acres, both children pressed their faces against the windows. "Can we have horses?" Emma asked excitedly. "And maybe chickens." Thomas added, his previously cool demeanor cracking to reveal the child still present beneath his almost teenage exterior. "Let's focus on making the house livable first," Sarah answered, though she found their enthusiasm infectious. The property had possibilities, despite its obvious neglect. The rolling fields, currently overgrown with scrub and cacti, could be cleared for gardening or small-scale farming. The barn, while sagging in places, had a surprisingly solid foundation, and the house itself, for all its cosmetic issues, had been built in an era when craftsmanship mattered. As they pulled up to the ranch house, Sarah allowed herself a moment of honesty about its condition. Sun-baked adobe walls showed cracks and erosion from decades of harsh weather. Several windows were boarded over, and the wooden porch listed slightly to one side. The yard, if it could be called that, was a tangle of desert plants with the occasional glimpse of what might once have been a garden. "It's a fixer-upper," she acknowledged as she parked the car using the realtor's euphemistic term that didn't begin to capture the magnitude of work ahead. "It's awesome," Emma declared with 9-year-old certainty already unbuckling her seatbelt. Thomas was more measured. "It needs a lot of work," he observed, though she detected excitement beneath his caution. "That it does," Sarah agreed. "But it's ours. No landlord, no temporary lease, just our place to make into whatever we want." As they stepped out of the car, the quiet of the countryside enveloped them, a stark contrast to the apartment complex near the highway where they'd spent the past 11 months. No traffic noise, no neighbors' televisions or arguments through thin walls, just birdsong, the rustle of wind through desert scrub, and the distant sound of what might be water, a creek that marked the property's western boundary, according to the survey map. Sarah unlocked the front door, which groaned in protest as it swung inward. The musty smell of long-abandoned spaces greeted them, dust-old wood, and the faint underlying scent of creosote and sage. Sunlight filtered through grimy windows, casting patterns on worn wooden floors that had once been polished to a shine, but now bore the scuffs and scratches of decades of use. "We'll open all the windows," Sarah said, moving through the front room toward what appeared to be the kitchen. "Air it out and see what we're really dealing with." The children scattered their footsteps, echoing through empty rooms as they claimed territories and shouted discoveries to each other. "Mom, there's a huge fireplace up here. The bathtub has claw feet like in old movies." Sarah smiled despite herself. For all its dilapidation, the house had undeniable character. Carved wooden beams across ceilings, hand-plastered walls, and the traditional adobe-style built-in cabinets with glass fronts in the dining room. Details from an era when houses were built to last generations, not just until the next real estate flip. The kitchen, predictably, would need the most work. Outdated appliances from perhaps the 1970s, laminate countertops peeling at the edges, and linoleum flooring curling up at the corners. But the room was spacious with large windows that would flood the space with light once properly cleaned. Sarah ran her hand along a countertop, leaving a trail in the dust. What had she gotten them into? The enormity of the project settled on her shoulders like a physical weight. Her VA disability payments and part-time bookkeeping job would cover the property taxes and basic utilities, but renovations would require creativity, sweat equity, and luck. She was still contemplating this when Emma's voice called from somewhere in the front of the house. "Mom, the wall moved, and I think there's something inside of it." Sarah frowned. "Don't touch anything else until I get there," she called, making her way toward her daughter's voice. She found Emma in what must have been a study or library, a small room off the main living area. One of the wood-paneled walls had a section that stood slightly ajar, revealing darkness behind. "I just leaned against it, and it clicked," Emma explained, and eyes wide with excitement. Sarah examined the wall carefully. What appeared to be solid wooden paneling was actually a concealed door cleverly designed to blend seamlessly with the surrounding wall. The mechanism seemed to be a simple pressure plate that Emma had accidentally triggered. "Stand back," Sarah instructed, years of military caution taking over. She pulled a small flashlight from her pocket and gently pushed the panel wider. The beam of light revealed a small alcove, perhaps 3 feet deep and 4 feet wide, built into the wall space. And there, resting on a crude wooden shelf, was a gun, an antique revolver, its metal dull with age, but its wooden grip still showing the rich patina of regular handling. Beside it lay a leather-bound book and what appeared to be a folded piece of yellowed paper. Is that a real gun? Thomas asked, having joined them silently. Very real, Sarah confirmed, recognizing the distinctive profile of a Colt single-action Army revolver, the famous Peacemaker, that had been the sidearm of choice throughout the American West. As a Marine Corps armorer, she developed an expertise in firearms that extended to historical weapons. With careful movements, she reached in and lifted the revolver, checking that it was unloaded before bringing it into the light for closer examination. The gun was remarkably well preserved, its mechanism still functioning despite decades of concealment, and there etched into the barrel in flowing script were three letters that made her breath catch: WHB, William H. Bonney, Billy the Kid's real name. "Mom, what is it?" Thomas asked, noting her sudden stillness. Sarah turned the gun over in her hands, her mind racing. "It's an 1873 Colt single-action Army, a very old, very valuable gun." She didn't mention the initials yet, not wanting to jump to conclusions that would excite the children prematurely. She returned to the alcove and carefully retrieved the book and paper. The book proved to be a journal, its pages filled with faded handwriting that would require time and better light to decipher. The paper was a map, hand-drawn in ink, showing what appeared to be the layout of a building, possibly this very house, with markings and notations that made little immediate sense. "We need to secure these properly," Sarah said, her voice dropping into what her children called her Marine mode, calm, authoritative, brooking no argument. "Then we need to check the rest of the house for structural issues before we start moving in. No more pushing on walls or exploring hidden spaces until we know the place is sound." As she carefully placed the items on a dusty sideboard, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that their affordable purchase had just become considerably more complicated. Lincoln County, New Mexico had been Billy the Kid territory during his short well-known life. The outlaw had met his legendary end in nearby Fort Sumner, supposedly shot dead by Sheriff Pat Garrett in 1881, though as with all things related to Billy the Kid, rumors and alternative theories abounded. Had they just stumbled upon an authentic artifact from one of America's most notorious outlaws? And if so, what else might this crumbling ranch house be hiding? The next morning dawned clear and cool, a brief respite before the heat of the day would settle over the desert. Sarah had spent a restless night on an air mattress in what would eventually become her bedroom, her mind churning with questions about their discovery. The children, with the adaptability of youth, had slept soundly despite the unfamiliar surroundings and the distant howls of coyotes. Over a simple breakfast prepared on a camping stove, the kitchen appliances needed inspection before use. Sarah outlined the day's priorities, checking the electrical and plumbing systems, securing doors and windows, and making a comprehensive list of immediate repairs. The mysterious gun and journal would have to wait until these essentials were addressed. "Can we go into town for supplies?" Thomas asked, always eager to explore new territories. Sarah nodded. "We'll need to stock up on cleaning supplies at minimum, and I want to ask around about reliable contractors." Their first venture into Diablo Springs as new residents, rather than just prospective property buyers, proved illuminating. The town consisted of one main street lined with buildings that reflected its 1880s origins, though now housing modern businesses, a general store that doubled as a hardware supplier, a small grocery, a diner, a post office, and various other establishments necessary for rural life. At the hardware store, they were greeted by an older man whose weathered face and calloused hands spoke of a lifetime of physical labor. His eyes, however, remained sharp and assessing beneath bushy white eyebrows. "You must be the folks who bought Rancho Escondido," he said by way of greeting, extending a hand. "James Reynolds, this is my place." Sarah shook his offered hand, noting the firm grip and the way his eyes lingered on her face with undisguised curiosity. "Sarah Blackwood, these are my children, Thomas and Emma." James nodded, studying them with an appraising look that reminded Sarah of old sergeants evaluating new recruits. His gaze settled briefly on the service pin on her jacket. "Marines," he asked. 12 years. Medical discharge 4 years ago." Something in his expression shifted, not quite approval, but a certain reassessment. "Army myself, 2 tours in Vietnam back when it was still a jungle and not a tourist destination." The shared understanding of military service created an immediate, if tenuous, connection. Reynolds gestured for them to follow him deeper into the store, past shelves stocked with an eclectic mix of modern hardware and what appeared to be antique tools. "Wouldn't have expected anyone to buy that place," he commented as he began gathering supplies they would likely need based on experienced assessment of new property owners. Been sitting empty since old Miguel Ortega passed, going on 15 years now. The price was right, Sarah acknowledged, watching as he added items to their growing pile that she hadn't even considered needing yet. Reynolds' expression suggested there might be more to the story than advantageous pricing. Folks around here tend to give that property a wide berth, he said carefully. History to it that makes some uncomfortable. Sarah felt a flutter of unease remembering the hidden gun with his provocative initials. What kind of history? Reynolds seemed to consider how much to share with these newcomers. Most of it's just talk, he finally said. Every old place in these parts has stories attached, but that one. He trailed off, then appeared to make a decision. You might want to look into the name Frank Miller, original owner of that property way back in the 1880s. The name meant nothing to Sarah, but Reynolds said it with the weight of someone referencing a figure everyone should recognize. Should I know who that is, she asked. Reynolds shook his head. Not unless you're up on local history from the 1880s. Rancher businessman, some say friend to Billy the Kid, had connections to your property way back when. He placed another item on their pile, a heavy-duty flashlight with remarkable battery life, according to its packaging. For exploring, he said with a meaningful look that Sarah couldn't quite interpret. As Reynolds rang up their purchases, an elderly woman entered the store. Her silver hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and despite the heat, she wore a formal blouse and skirt that seemed from another era. The storekeeper nodded respectfully in her direction. Mrs. Gutierrez, what can I do for you today? The woman approached slowly, leaning slightly on a carved wooden cane, her dark eyes immediately fixing on Sarah and her children with undisguised interest. You are the new owners of Rancho Escondido, she stated rather than asked, her voice carrying the musical cadence of a native Spanish speaker, though her English was flawless. Word travels fast, Sarah observed. The elderly woman's mouth curved in what might have been a smile. In Diablo Springs, the wind carries whispers and the walls have ears, she replied, the poetic phrasing at odds with her otherwise practical demeanor. I am Maria Gutierrez. My family has lived in this valley since before it was American territory. She extended a hand which Sarah shook gently, feeling the surprising strength in the older woman's grip. Sarah Blackwood. These are my children, Thomas and Emma. Maria's gaze lingered on Thomas, who stood slightly taller under her scrutiny. You have the look of a scholar, she observed, causing the boy to flush with pleased embarrassment. You will find our history interesting, I think. To Emma, she offered a smaller nod. And you little one have explorer's eyes. Be careful where they lead you. Sarah found herself both charmed and slightly unnerved by the woman's mannered speech and penetrating gaze. We're still getting settled, she said, but I'd welcome any information about the property's history. Maria Gutierrez considered this for a moment, then reached into her handbag and withdrew a business card. Come to the Historical Society when you are ready. I am there Tuesday through Friday cataloging our archives. She handed the card to Sarah, then turned to Reynolds. James, I need the special light bulbs for the display cases. As Reynolds moved to help the elderly woman, Sarah examined the card. Maria Gutierrez, head archivist, Diablo Springs Historical Society. It read with an address on Main Street. By the time they left the hardware store laden with supplies and subtle warnings about their new home's mysterious past, Sarah's curiosity had been thoroughly piqued. She made a mental note to visit the Historical Society once the immediate work on the house was underway. Back at Rancho Escondido, they spent the remainder of the day cleaning, airing out rooms, and making the space minimally habitable until their furniture arrived the following day. As dusk approached, Sarah found a moment to examine their discoveries from the hidden alcove more carefully. Seated at a folding table on the front porch with the failing light supplemented by the new heavy-duty flashlight, she turned the antique revolver over in her hands. The gun was a Colt single-action Army manufactured around 1873 to 1875 based on its serial number. The WHB engraving was small but distinct, etched into the barrel by someone with skill. Could it actually have belonged to William H. Bonney Billy the Kid? The timing would be right, and the location certainly placed it within the realm of possibility. The journal proved to be the record of Frank Miller, dated from 1880 to 1882. The handwriting was educated but utilitarian. The entries primarily concerned with ranch operations, weather patterns, and business dealings. Sarah skimmed through, looking for any mention of Billy the Kid or unusual activities. April 18, 1880. William visited late. Stayed in the back room. Supplied him with provisions, but asked no questions. Better that way. September 3rd, 1880. Completed improvements to the root cellar. William provided funds from his banking transactions. Elizabeth must not know the source. The less she knows, the safer she remains. June 12th, 1881. Riders claiming to be cattle buyers came today. Asked too many questions about the property layout. William says Garrett sometimes employs such methods. Must be more cautious. The entries continued sporadically until a final notation dated July 15th, 1881, just days after Billy the Kid was reportedly killed by Sheriff Pat Garrett. Reports say William was killed at Fort Sumner. Garrett claims the body was identified. I know better. The arrangements are complete. When this journal is found, the truth will already be established beyond questioning. History belongs to those who write it. The journal ended there with many blank pages following the final entry. Sarah checked the inside back cover and found a small notation in different handwriting. Journal of Franklin Miller, my grandfather. Family record, not for public knowledge. Sarah's mind raced with implications. The journal strongly suggested that Frank Miller had been a close associate of Billy the Kid, referring to him by his given name William. More intriguingly, it hinted that the official account of the outlaw's death might have been fabricated with Miller's assistance in some deception. The map, when she unfolded it, fully revealed a detailed layout of the ranch house, as it must have existed in the 1880s before later additions. Several areas were marked with X's and cryptic notations. One label near what would be the current kitchen particularly caught her attention. Main entrance, maintained spring 1882 by FM. Entrance to what Sarah wondered. And why would it need maintenance, Mom? Thomas's voice broke into her thoughts. He stood in the doorway watching her with undisguised curiosity. What are those? Sarah considered how much to share. Thomas was mature for his age. The Diablo Springs Historical Society occupied a squat adobe building that had once served as the town's first schoolhouse. Its windows, small and deep-set in the traditional style, cast rectangles of light across worn wooden floors that had supported generations of local children before being repurposed for historical preservation. Sarah stepped through the front door the following morning, a small brass bell announcing her arrival. The interior was cooler than the already warming day outside the thick adobe walls, performing their centuries-old function of temperature regulation. Glass display cases lined the walls, showcasing artifacts from the region's complex history, Native American pottery, Spanish colonial documents, frontier-era weapons, and photographs of stern-faced settlers staring out from the sepia-toned past. I wondered how long it would take you to visit us. Maria Gutierrez's voice came from a doorway at the rear of the main room. The elderly archivist stood framed in the entrance to what appeared to be a research area, her silver hair once again pulled back in a formal bun, her dark eyes sharp with intelligence despite her advanced years. I've been busy settling in, Sarah replied, approaching with measured steps. But I've found some things at the ranch that raised questions. Maria nodded as if this was precisely what she had expected. The hidden places have revealed themselves to you then. They do not do so for everyone. She gestured toward the back room. Come, we will talk where it is private. The research room beyond was lined with metal shelving units containing boxes of documents, ledgers, and photographs. A large wooden table dominated the center, its surface currently occupied by stacks of papers and what appeared to be property maps from various eras. Maria closed the door behind them and indicated a chair. Sit, please. Your children are not with you today. They're exploring the property, Sarah answered, taking the offered seat, under strict instructions to stay out of the house and away from the outbuildings. A slight smile crossed Maria's face. Children and instructions often maintain a relationship of convenience rather than obedience. But the dangers at Rancho Escondido are not immediate to the cautious explorer. Sarah decided to abandon preliminaries. I found a hidden alcove containing an 1873 Colt revolver with the initials WHB, a journal belonging to Frank Miller, and a map showing what appears to be a tunnel system. Then I discovered a concealed staircase leading to an underground room with access to a tunnel. If she had expected surprise from the archivist, she was disappointed. Maria merely nodded, her expression one of confirmation rather than revelation. The hidden archives of Rancho Escondido, she said softly. Frank Miller's insurance policy preserved across generations. Insurance against what? Sarah asked. Maria settled into a chair across from her, arranging her skirt with practiced precision. Against the rewriting of history, Mrs. Blackwood. Against the triumph of the official record over the truth. She leaned forward slightly. What do you know of Billy the Kid? The basics, Sarah replied. Born Henry McCarty, also known as William H. Bonney, central figure in the Lincoln County War, escaped custody multiple times before being shot by Pat Garrett in 1881. So says the official history, Maria agreed. A convenient narrative that restored order to a chaotic territory and advanced the careers of men like Garrett. But in Diablo Springs, other stories have persisted, stories preserved by families who witnessed different events. The elderly woman rose and moved to one of the shelving units, retrieving a leather-bound volume similar to the journal Sarah had found. This is the companion to your discovery, she explained, placing it carefully on the table. Frank Miller's second journal covering 1882 to 1889 after the supposed death of Billy the Kid. Sarah stared at the journal, understanding dawning. You knew what I would find at the ranch. I suspected, Maria corrected. The Ortega family, the last owners, were not interested in the property's history. They sealed the hidden places, preferring to focus on ranching operations. When Miguel developed Alzheimer's and the property fell into disrepair, many of us feared the historical evidence might be lost or destroyed. She opened the journal to a marked page. Read this entry from October 3, 1882. Sarah leaned forward, examining the faded but legible handwriting. William has settled well in Colorado under his new identity. Monthly correspondence confirms his business ventures prosper. The irony of his legitimate success after years of notoriety would amuse his former adversaries. The tunnel system has been fully secured and access points concealed as planned. Should future need arise, always remains in readiness. Garrett continues to enjoy his fame as the man who killed Billy the Kid. Let him have his glory. The living truth is worth more than dead legend. Frank Miller helped Billy the Kid fake his death and escape to Colorado. Sarah said, the implications becoming clear. Maria nodded. So our local history maintains. Frank Miller was not merely an associate of Billy the Kid, but his half-uncle on his mother's side, a family connection carefully omitted from official records but preserved in local memory. When Garrett closed in, Miller provided the means for his nephew's escape, including the elaborate tunnel system you have discovered. But why, Sarah asked? Why go to such lengths, and why preserve the evidence rather than destroy it? Ah, Maria smiled slightly. There is the real historical mystery. According to family stories passed down through generations, Billy the Kid possessed something of great value, something that multiple powerful interests were willing to kill for. The tunnels were not merely an escape route, but a secure location for whatever this item or information might have been. Sarah thought of the map she'd found with its marked locations and cryptic notations. And this valuable thing might still be hidden somewhere on the property. It is possible, Maria acknowledged. Though many have searched over the decades, the Ortega family, treasure hunters who trespassed during periods when the ranch was unoccupied, even certain officials with the resources to conduct more thorough investigations. She fixed Sarah with a penetrating gaze. Which brings us to the present circumstance. Your purchase of Rancho Escondido has reawakened dormant interest in its secrets. You should be prepared for uninvited attention. Like Richard Montgomery appearing on my property after dark, Sarah asked. Maria's expression registered mild surprise. Montgomery introduced himself already. Interesting. He is not usually so forward. She considered for a moment. Richard Montgomery is more than simply your neighbor, Mrs. Blackwood. His great-grandfather was a deputy who rode with Pat Garrett. The Montgomery family has maintained a particular interest in Billy the Kid's story for generations, one might say. And James Reynolds at the hardware store, where does he fit in? James is a relative newcomer, only 40 years in Diablo Springs, Maria replied with the perspective of someone whose family history stretched back centuries in the region. But he has become a student of local history and a collector of frontier-era artifacts. His interest in Rancho Escondido is primarily scholarly, I believe. Sarah absorbed this information, connecting it with her observations and the discoveries at the ranch. So the hidden gun, the journals, the tunnel system, these aren't just historical curiosities, but evidence that might rewrite an established piece of American history. Precisely, Maria confirmed. Evidence that Billy the Kid did not die as recorded, that Pat Garrett's famous moment of frontier justice was a fabrication, and that official history has perpetuated a lie for almost 150 years. Why tell me all this? Sarah asked. Why not keep the local version of history within the community? Maria's expression grew solemn. Because Rancho Escondido chose you, Mrs. Blackwood. Properties with such history sometimes select their custodians rather than the reverse. She gestured toward the window where the harsh New Mexico sun cast stark shadows across the landscape. This land remembers its stories. The walls of your house have witnessed history that contradicts what is written in textbooks. Now you must decide what to do with that knowledge. Sarah considered this cryptic response, finding it simultaneously frustrating and compelling. I need to research more before making any decisions, she said finally. May I see what other documentation you have about Frank Miller and his connection to Billy the Kid? Maria nodded, seemingly pleased with this measured approach. Of course, the Historical Society's archives are open to serious researchers, especially those who now own pieces of our collective past. I see. For the next 3 hours, Sarah immersed herself in the Historical Society's records, examining photographs, property documents, and personal accounts related to Rancho Escondido and its original owner. The picture that emerged both clarified and complicated her understanding of what she had purchased. Frank Miller had arrived in Lincoln County in 1873, establishing a modest cattle operation that gradually expanded into one of the region's more successful ranches. His connection to Billy the Kid had been carefully obscured in official records, but local documents, church registries, personal correspondence, and business records confirmed Maria's assertion that Miller was the half-brother of Catherine McCarty, Billy's mother. When the Lincoln County War erupted in 1878, Miller had maintained official neutrality while privately supporting his nephew's faction. After Billy's escape from execution and his supposed death at Fort Sumner, Miller had continued operating his ranch for another decade before selling the property and reportedly moving to Colorado, the same state where, according to his journal, Billy had established a new identity. Most intriguingly, Sarah found references to a significant shipment of gold that had disappeared during the height of the Lincoln County conflicts. Several sources suggested Billy the Kid had knowledge of its location, making him a target for more than just his role in the murder of Sheriff Brady. The lost Lincoln County gold, Maria explained when Sarah asked about these references. A shipment intended for the territorial government that vanished in 1878. $20,000 in gold coin, a fortune at that time, worth millions today. Billy the Kid was suspected of involvement in its disappearance, though no evidence was ever found connecting him to the theft. And people think this gold might be hidden at Rancho Escondido, Sarah asked, the pieces falling into place. It is one theory, Maria acknowledged. The elaborate tunnel system, the careful preservation of secret records, Frank Miller's sudden prosperity after years of modest success, these suggest something valuable may have been concealed on the property. Sarah thought of the map she'd found with its marked locations and cryptic notations. Could it indicate hiding places for portions of this lost gold? The tunnel entrance she'd discovered was clearly only one part of a larger system. What might lie deeper within, in areas not yet explored? As she prepared to leave the Historical Society, Maria handed her a small leather-bound book. This might be useful in your research, the elderly archivist said. A collection of first-hand accounts from the Lincoln County War, including some from individuals who knew Billy the Kid personally, less filtered than the popular histories. Sarah accepted the book with thanks, sensing that Maria Gutierrez had decided to become an ally in her exploration of Rancho Escondido's secrets. As she turned to leave, a final question occurred to her. The current sheriff, does he have any connection to this history? Maria's expression turned guarded. Sheriff Harlan Cooper comes from one of the oldest families in the county. His great-grandfather was a business partner of Lawrence Murphy, one of the primary antagonists in the Lincoln County War, and a bitter enemy of Billy the Kid. She paused significantly. The Cooper family has always maintained that the official account of Billy's death is correct, and that local alternatives are mere folklore. Sheriff Cooper himself has been discouraged when confronted with evidence to the contrary. I see, Sarah said, understanding the warning implicit in this information. Thank you for your candor. The drive back to Rancho Escondido gave Sarah time to process what she had learned. The property she had purchased as a simple solution to her family's housing needs had turned out to be a historical nexus. potentially containing evidence that could rewrite a significant chapter of frontier history, as well as a lost fortune in gold that multiple local factions might still be seeking. As she turned onto the gravel drive leading to the ranch house, Sarah noticed an unfamiliar vehicle parked near the front porch, a sheriff's department SUV, its official markings gleaming in the afternoon sun. Her military instincts immediately heightened. Maria's warning about Sheriff Cooper's interest in maintaining the official history seemed suddenly uncomfortably relevant. A man in a tan uniform stood on the porch talking with Thomas and Emma. Tall and broad-shouldered with the weathered complexion of someone who spent considerable time outdoors, he turned as Sarah's explorer approached, his expression unreadable behind mirrored sunglasses. "That's our mom," Sarah heard Emma saying as she parked and stepped out of the vehicle. "Sheriff Cooper." The man introduced himself as Sarah approached, removing his sunglasses to reveal sharp blue eyes that assessed her with professional thoroughness. "Thought I'd stop by and welcome our newest resident to the county. Your kids have been showing me around the property." His tone was friendly enough, but Sarah noted the calculated casualness of his posture and the way his gaze had already inventoried her vehicle, her appearance, and likely her body language for any signs of nervousness or deception. "Sarah Blackwood," she replied, extending a hand which he shook firmly. "I appreciate the welcome. We're still getting settled." "So I see," Cooper nodded, glancing toward the house where visible repairs were underway. "Quite a project you've taken on. Rancho Escondido has been vacant for some time." "The price was right," Sarah said, using the same explanation she'd given James Reynolds. "And I'm not afraid of hard work." Cooper studied her with undisguised interest. "Military background. Marines, 12 years medical discharge 4 years ago." "Thank you for your service," Cooper said with the automatic response of someone who had never served himself but knew the expected social ritual. "What brings you to Diablo Springs specifically?" Not exactly a hub for job opportunities. The question seemed innocuous, but Sarah sensed the sheriff was fishing for information beyond casual curiosity. "Remote work options have opened up possibilities," she answered vaguely. "And after years of urban living, the space and quiet appealed to us." Cooper nodded, though his expression suggested he wasn't entirely satisfied with this explanation. "Well, we're glad to have you. Small communities like ours depend on good people putting down roots." He handed her a business card. "Sheriff's Department is always available if you need assistance. Response times can be slower out here, of course, given the distances involved." "I appreciate that," Sarah replied, pocketing the card. "We're pretty self-sufficient, generally speaking." "So I gathered," Cooper said with a small smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Your son mentioned you were at the Historical Society today, developing an interest in local history already." The deliberately casual question confirmed Sarah's suspicion that her visit to Maria Gutierrez had been noted and reported. In a town the size of Diablo Springs, little would go unobserved. "Just getting oriented to the area," she replied neutrally. "Mrs. Gutierrez was very helpful in explaining the region's background." "Maria's a treasure," Cooper agreed, though something in his tone suggested reservation. "Been the guardian of our local history for decades. Has some colorful interpretations of certain events. But that's what makes small-town history interesting, isn't it? The local legends and alternative perspectives." His emphasis on alternative carried clear dismissal, confirming Maria's assessment of his position on the Billy the Kid controversy. "History's always written by someone," Sarah observed. "Perspective matters." Cooper's eyes narrowed slightly at this philosophical response. "Indeed it does, Mrs. Blackwood. Indeed it does." He replaced his sunglasses, his expression once again unreadable behind the reflective lenses. "I should continue my patrol. Don't hesitate to call if you need anything." As the sheriff's SUV disappeared down the driveway, kicking up dust in its wake, Thomas approached his mother with obvious concern. "He was asking a lot of questions about the house," he said quietly, "about whether we'd found anything interesting during the renovations." Sarah's unease deepened. "What did you tell him?" "Nothing about the hidden room or the gun," Thomas assured her. "Just that we were still cleaning and fixing things up." Emma almost said something, but I squeezed her hand and she stopped. Sarah ruffled his hair affectionately, proud of his perception and quick thinking. "Good instincts. Let's keep our discoveries private for now, at least until we understand more about what we found." Inside the house, Emma was bursting with news of her own. "Mom, we found something else while you were gone in the barn," Sarah followed her excited daughter to the weathered structure that had once housed livestock and equipment. The barn's interior was dim after the bright sunlight outside the air, heavy with the sense of old hay dust and the lingering traces of animals long gone. Emma led her to a back corner where a section of the plank flooring had been pulled up, revealing dark soil beneath. Thomas was already there, kneeling beside the opening, a flashlight in hand. Emma was exploring and felt a hollow spot, he explained. We pried up the boards and found this. The beam of his flashlight illuminated a small metal box buried in the earth, not fully concealed, as if someone had started to dig it up and then been interrupted. Don't touch it, Sarah instructed, kneeling beside her son. Let me see first. With careful movements, she excavated around the box, revealing a metal container approximately 12 inches long, 8 inches wide, and 6 inches deep. Its surface was corroded but intact with no visible lock or opening mechanism. Using a small pry bar from her tool belt, Sarah gently leveraged the lid open, revealing the contents. Inside, nestled in what appeared to be deteriorated fabric, was another revolver. This one a Smith & Wesson Model 3, manufactured in the late 1870s based on its design. Unlike the Colt from the hidden alcove, this gun showed signs of hard use nicks and wear patterns consistent with a weapon that had seen regular service rather than careful preservation. Beside the revolver lay a small leather pouch, cinched tight with a drawstring. Sarah carefully opened it, tipping the contents into her palm. 3 gold coins gleamed in the flashlight beam, their surfaces still bright despite decades underground. Each bore the unmistakable profile of Liberty and the dates 1887, 1877, and 1878. Is that real gold? Emma whispered, her eyes wide with wonder. $5 gold pieces, Sarah confirmed, examining the coins carefully. From right around the time of the Lincoln County War. The final item in the box was a folded piece of paper, the creases brittle with age. Sarah opened it with extreme care, revealing a hand-drawn map similar to the one she'd found in the hidden alcove, but with different markings and notations. This one showed what appeared to be the surrounding landscape rather than the house itself, with several locations marked by X's and the notation FM and WHB 1881 at the bottom. It's another treasure map. Thomas breathed excitement, overriding his usual teenage reserve. Maybe, Sarah cautioned, carefully refolding the fragile document, or maybe just a record of locations important to Frank Miller and Billy the Kid. She returned the items to the metal box, her mind racing with implications. The Historical Society records had mentioned a lost shipment of gold coins. Here were 3 such coins, hidden along with another weapon and a map marking locations in the surrounding area. The connections were becoming clearer, suggesting that Rancho Escondido might indeed hold portions of the legendary lost gold, perhaps distributed in multiple caches across the property. We need to secure this inside, Sarah decided, lifting the box carefully, and I think it's time we explored more of that tunnel system. Back in the house, Sarah added their new discoveries to the lockbox containing the original gun journal and map. The accumulated evidence was painting an increasingly compelling picture of Rancho Escondido as not just a historical footnote, but a deliberately preserved time capsule, one containing both documentary evidence of Billy the Kid's survival and potentially a significant portion of the lost Lincoln County gold. After dinner with the children, occupied with unpacking books for the small library area she'd created, Sarah spread the 2 maps side by side on the kitchen table, comparing their markings and notations. The first map showed the house and tunnel system, with several areas marked for reasons not yet clear. The second showed the surrounding landscape, with X's marking what appeared to be external locations, possible entrances to the tunnel system or separate hiding places. One notation particularly caught her attention. Near what would be the creek at the western edge of the property, a small X was marked with the words, Main Reserve, secured by FM 1881. Could this indicate the primary cache of the stolen gold? Sarah was still studying the maps when a knock at the front door startled her. After quickly returning the documents to the lockbox, she approached the door, cautiously conscious of Sheriff Cooper's earlier visit and Maria Gutierrez's warnings about uninvited attention. Through the window, she was relieved to see James Reynolds standing on the porch, a large toolbox in one hand. Evening, he greeted her when she opened the door. Thought you might need some specialized equipment for those renovations you are undertaking. His emphasis on specialized carried clear meaning beyond the words themselves. That's very thoughtful, Sarah replied, stepping back to allow him entry. The children are in the library if you'd like to say hello. Reynolds shook his head slightly. Better if we keep this between adults for now, he said quietly, following her to the kitchen, where he placed the toolbox on the table. Richard Montgomery mentioned he'd introduced himself. Thought you might be ready for some straight talk about what you've found. Sarah studied the older man carefully, weighing how much to reveal. Reynolds had been helpful and seemingly genuine in their previous interactions, but Diablo Springs was clearly a community with complex historical allegiances and secrets. "I've found some interesting historical artifacts," she acknowledged cautiously, "and architectural features not mentioned in the property listing." Reynolds nodded unsurprised. "The tunnel system," he stated rather than asked, "and I'd wager at least one of the caches based on Montgomery's assessment of your conversation." "You and Montgomery discuss me often?" Sarah asked, a defensive edge entering her voice. Reynolds held up a placating hand. "Not in the way you're thinking. Richard and I have different perspectives on the Billy the Kid situation, but we share concerns about certain other interested parties." He glanced toward the window, his expression somber. "Particularly now that Sheriff Cooper has taken a personal interest in your property." "The sheriff stopped by earlier today," Sarah confirmed. "Seemed very interested in whether I'd found anything unusual during renovations." "I'll bet he was," Reynolds muttered. "Cooper's family has been searching for the Lincoln County gold for 3 generations. His grandfather used to trespass on this property regularly when it was vacant between owners looking for entrance points to the tunnel system." He opened the toolbox, revealing not standard tools but specialized equipment, high-powered flashlights, a handheld metal detector, mapping tools, air quality monitors, and what appeared to be military-grade communications devices. "Vietnam taught me to be prepared for tunnel exploration," Reynolds explained, noting Sarah's raised eyebrow at the equipment. "Spent 6 months with a team clearing Viet Cong tunnel complexes. Never lost my caution about underground spaces." He removed a small device from the box. "Carbon monoxide detector. Old tunnel systems can trap pockets of bad air. This will warn you before you feel the effects." Next came a compact LED headlamp. Keeps your hands free while providing consistent illumination. As he continued explaining the equipment, Sarah realized Reynolds was offering not just tools but expertise for safely exploring the tunnel system and implicit support for her investigation into the ranch's secrets. "Why help me?" she asked directly. "What's your interest in all this?" Reynolds paused, considering her question with appropriate seriousness. "2 reasons," he finally said. "First, I've spent 40 years collecting and preserving artifacts from this region's history. The truth about Billy the Kid matters to me as a historical record, not a treasure hunt." He met her gaze directly. "Second, and more importantly, you've got kids. Whatever's hidden in those tunnels has led to at least 2 deaths that I know of treasure hunters who got careless or desperate. I'd rather see you properly equipped than take unnecessary risks." "Deaths?" Sarah asked sharply. "No one mentioned fatalities associated with the property." "Happened in the 1960s and again in the 1990s, Reynolds explained. "Not exactly selling points for real estate agents. One man fell through a collapsed section of tunnel. Another died from oxygen deprivation in a sealed chamber. The tunnels are extensive and not all areas remain structurally sound after 140 years." Sarah absorbed this sobering information, her military training automatically recalibrating her approach to the underground exploration. "I appreciate the equipment and the warning," she said, "but I'm still not clear on where you stand regarding the historical questions. Do you believe Billy the Kid survived contrary to the official record?" Reynolds leaned back in his chair, his weathered face thoughtful. "Let me show you something," he said, reaching into his pocket and withdrawing a folded piece of paper. He opened it carefully, revealing a photocopy of what appeared to be an old newspaper clipping. "Denver Business Register, 1894, he explained. "Report on the opening of a new banking establishment. Look at the man on the far right." Sarah examined the grainy image of 5 men in formal attire standing before a stone building. The figure Reynolds indicated was of medium height and build, his features partially obscured by a neatly trimmed beard. Nothing immediately remarkable distinguished him from his colleagues. "Now look at this," Reynolds said, producing a second document, a photocopy of a known photograph of Billy the Kid, one of the few authenticated images of the outlaw, showing him standing with a rifle. "Compare the eyes," Reynolds instructed, "the set of the shoulders, the way he holds his head slightly tilted to the right." Sarah studied both images carefully, her trained eye for detail, noting the similarities Reynolds highlighted. Despite the beard and more formal attire in the Denver photograph, There were indeed striking resemblances in posture and facial structure. The Denver banker's name was William Miller, Reynolds continued, reportedly a cousin of Frank Miller, who had relocated from New Mexico to establish himself in Colorado finance. He operated successfully for over 20 years, becoming a respected community leader before dying of natural causes in 1917. William Miller, Sarah repeated the initials, registering immediately. WM instead of WHB. Reynolds nodded, a subtle transformation maintaining enough connection to his past to satisfy personal identity while creating sufficient distance for public safety. You've researched this thoroughly, Sarah observed. It's been a 40-year project, Reynolds acknowledged. Started as casual interest when I moved here after Vietnam. Developed into something more serious as I acquired artifacts and documentation that contradicted the official history. He gestured toward the house around them. Rancho Escondido is the missing piece, the physical location where the transition from Billy the Kid to William Miller was orchestrated and evidence preserved. Frank Miller created a historical insurance policy in these walls and tunnels, ensuring that someday the truth would emerge. But why wait 140 years, Sarah asked. Why didn't someone reveal this evidence decades ago? Some tried, Reynolds replied grimly. In the 1920s, a previous owner began researching the property's connections to Billy the Kid. He died in a suspicious hunting accident before publishing his findings. In the 1960s, an historian from the University of New Mexico made significant discoveries here before being discredited through a scandal that many believe was engineered by powerful interests. He leaned forward, his expression intense. History is more than academic record, Mrs. Blackwood. It's identity, it's validation. For families like the Coopers, whose ancestors built reputations on the official version of events, the truth about Billy the Kid threatens generational self-image. For others, like Maria Gutierrez's family, the alternative history represents resistance against the whitewashing of complex frontier realities. The implications settled heavily between them. Sarah's simple search for affordable housing had placed her family at the center of a historical controversy with contemporary ramifications, one that various factions in Diablo Springs had strong motivations to either expose or suppress. And the gold, she asked, is that part of your historical interest as well? Reynolds smiled slightly. I won't claim to be above human avarice, Mrs. Blackwood. If the lost Lincoln County gold exists and remains hidden at Rancho Escondido, its historical value is matched only by its current worth, likely millions, in today's market beyond its numismatic significance. He closed the toolbox, having completed his explanation of its contents. But finding the gold without understanding its context would be hollow victory. The real treasure here is the truth, the actual events that have been obscured by convenient narratives and official histories. As Reynolds prepared to leave, he offered one final piece of advice. Be careful who you trust with what you find, he said. Even well-meaning individuals may have competing interests or loyalties. And watch for unusual activity around the property. Your discoveries won't remain secret for long in a community this size. After seeing him out, Sarah returned to the kitchen, her mind processing the new information and perspective Reynolds had provided. The equipment he'd brought would make exploring the tunnel system safer, but his warnings about previous fatalities and competing interests added layers of complexity and potential danger to what had initially seemed a fascinating historical mystery. She was examining the metal detector when Thomas entered the kitchen, his expression troubled. "Mom, there's someone outside," he said quietly. "I saw lights moving near the creek when I was closing my bedroom curtains." Sarah's military instincts immediately heightened. "Stay inside," she instructed, moving to the window. "Keep Emma away from the windows, too." Through the darkness, she could indeed see the distant bobbing of what appeared to be flashlights near the western edge of the property, precisely where the second map had marked Main Reserve, secured by FM 1881. Someone else was searching for the Lincoln County gold on her property. Sarah's mind raced through options. Confronting unknown trespassers in the dark presented significant risks. Calling the sheriff's department seemed unwise given Cooper's personal interest in the property. Yet allowing unknown individuals to excavate potentially valuable historical artifacts or dangerous structural elements of the tunnel system couldn't go unchallenged. She retrieved her phone and found Richard Montgomery's contact information, which he had provided during his unexpected visit. The call connected after 2 rings. "Mrs. Blackwood," Montgomery answered, his voice alert despite the late hour. Is everything all right? There are people with flashlights near the creek on my property, Sarah reported concisely. At least two, possibly more. Given what I've learned today about local interest in Rancho Escondido's secrets, I thought you might have insight before I take action. A brief silence followed, then Montgomery's voice returned tense with concern. Don't approach them. I have a good idea who it might be. I can be there in 15 minutes. Should I call the sheriff? Sarah asked, testing his reaction. Not advisable, Montgomery replied immediately, confirming her own instinct. Cooper's deputy Ellis runs a treasure hunting group that's been fixated on your property for years. If it's them involving the department, would only complicate matters. I'll wait for you near the house, Sarah decided, but I'm not letting anyone remove artifacts from my property. After ending the call, she moved efficiently through the house, securing doors and windows before retrieving her lockbox. The growing collection of historical items, the guns, the journals, the maps, and the gold coins represented both historical evidence and potential legal complications. She needed to ensure their safety regardless of what transpired with the trespassers. What's happening? Thomas asked as she returned to the kitchen, now carrying a small backpack containing the secured artifacts. Someone's trespassing near the creek, Sarah explained, keeping her voice calm but authoritative. Mr. Montgomery is coming to help deal with the situation. I need you to stay with Emma in the center hallway away from exterior walls and windows until I tell you it's safe to move. Thomas nodded, recognizing the serious tone that his mother reserved for genuine concerns. Is it about what we found, the guns and the map? Probably, Sarah acknowledged, seeing no benefit in shielding him from obvious conclusions. There are people in town who've been searching for certain historical artifacts for generations. Our discoveries may have drawn attention. As Thomas went to collect his sister, Sarah moved to the front porch, positioning herself where she could observe both the approach from the main road and the distant flashlight still visible near the creek. The desert night had turned cool stars brilliant in the clear sky above, the silence broken only by the occasional call of nightbirds and the faint sounds of activity from the trespassers. Minutes later, headlights appeared on the access road, approaching with normal illumination, rather than the stealth that might be expected from additional trespassers. Montgomery's pickup truck pulled up beside Sarah's Explorer, and the older man emerged carrying what appeared to be a rifle case. They're still there, Sarah reported quietly as he joined her on the porch, moving around the area near the large cottonwood by the creek bend. Montgomery nodded, his expression grim in the faint light from the house windows. Ellis and his treasure hunting club, most likely. They've been fixated on that area since some historical society documents were digitized last year, materials suggesting the main reserve of the Lincoln County gold might be buried near a water source on the property. Historical society? Sarah questioned. Maria Gutierrez allowed treasure hunters access to sensitive documents. Not intentionally, Montgomery clarified. Her assistant, a grandnephew of Sheriff Cooper, coincidentally uploaded certain materials without proper review. By the time Maria discovered the breach, the information had already circulated among local treasure hunting groups. He unzipped the rifle case, revealing not a weapon, but a high-powered spotting scope on a compact tripod. Let's see exactly what we're dealing with, he said, setting up the equipment and training it on the distant figures. After a moment of adjustment, he stepped back. Take a look. 3 individuals, one with metal detecting equipment. They're conducting a systematic search pattern. Sarah looked through the scope, immediately identifying the figures, 3 men in dark clothing, one indeed carrying what appeared to be a metal detector, while the others dug with shovels at indicated locations. Their movements suggested organization and purpose rather than random treasure hunting. That's Deputy Ellis on the right, Montgomery identified quietly. The others are local men, Vince Hurley, who runs the gas station, and Michael Whitmore, son of Eleanora Whitmore, from the museum board. The museum director's son is trespassing on my property, Sarah asked, surprised by this connection. Montgomery's expression darkened. The Whitmore family has its own historical claims regarding the Lincoln County gold. Eleanor's grandfather was reportedly involved in the original shipment that disappeared. They've maintained for generations that Billy the Kid stole the gold and hid it at Rancho Escondido with Frank Miller's assistance. The complexity of local interests surrounding her property continued to deepen, Sarah realized. Not just historical truth versus official record, but multiple family legacies and potential fortunes intertwined with the mysteries buried in her land. We need to confront them, she decided. Establish clearly that unauthorized excavation on private property won't be tolerated. Montgomery nodded agreement. They're armed, he warned, having noted this through the spotting scope. Not unusual for nighttime activities in remote areas with wildlife concerns, but worth noting. So am I, Sarah replied simply, revealing the holstered sidearm partially concealed beneath her jacket, a 9mm Beretta she'd maintained possession of since her military service. Let's approach from different angles. Reduce the likelihood of anyone slipping away before we can identify them fully. The tactical assessment came naturally, years of military training asserting itself in response to potential threat. Montgomery raised an eyebrow, a new respect evident in his expression as he recognized the shift in her demeanor from cautious homeowner to experienced strategist. You've done this before, he observed, confronted armed trespassers. Occasionally, Sarah acknowledged without elaboration. I'll circle around from the east. You approach directly from the house. Wait for my signal. I'll flash my light 3 times when I'm in position. Montgomery nodded, accepting her lead without question, another indicator of his own military background, recognizing competent tactical planning when he encountered it. The children, he asked. Secure inside, Vera assured him, away from windows and exterior walls. Thomas has instructions to call for help if neither of us returns within 30 minutes. With a final check of her flashlight and phone, Sarah moved silently into the darkness, her footsteps assured despite the unfamiliar terrain. As she circled toward the creek, keeping low and using natural features for cover, she reflected on the strange turn her life had taken. 4 days ago, she had been a struggling single mother seeking affordable housing. Now she was stalking armed trespassers across her property in the middle of the night, defending historical artifacts potentially worth millions, and secrets that might rewrite American frontier history. Somewhere in the darkness ahead, the Lincoln County gold waited to be discovered, along with the truth about Billy the Kid's fate and the elaborate deception that had preserved both for almost 150 years. Sarah moved forward, ready to confront whatever emerged from the shadows of Rancho Escondido's hidden past. The desert at night played tricks with sound whispers traveled for miles while gunshots could vanish into sand and silence. Sarah moved like someone who'd done this 100 times, each time with the same quiet resolve. Moonlight washed the canyon in silver, turning boulders into ghosts and brush into still centuries. From behind a stand of creosote, she watched the 3 men. Deputy Ellis, all stern jaw and clipboard confidence, issued low orders like a man rehearsing a lie. Their methodical approach suggested this wasn't their first such expedition. They worked with the coordination of a team that had developed routines through practice, maintaining minimal verbal communication and using hand signals for basic instructions. Sarah withdrew her phone, sending Montgomery a brief text. 3 subjects confirmed, armed, organized search pattern, ready for approach. Seconds later, his reply appeared. In position west of creek, await your signal. Returning the phone to her pocket, Sarah took a final assessment of the situation. The trespassers had positioned their vehicle, a dark SUV partially concealed by brush, for quick departure along a dirt track that connected to the main road without passing the ranch house. They had clearly planned this incursion, carefully choosing a moonlit night and a location where the creek would mask sounds of digging. What they hadn't planned for was Sarah's military training or her growing determination to protect not just her property, but the historical significance of what it contained. The lost Lincoln County gold wasn't merely a treasure to be looted by nocturnal treasure hunters, but a physical connection to a historical narrative that had been suppressed for generations. She raised her flashlight and gave the agreed signal, 3 distinct flashes toward Montgomery's position. Then, without hesitation, she activated the powerful beam, directing it squarely at Deputy Ellis, while simultaneously emerging from cover. This is private property, she called to her voice carrying the unmistakable tone of military command. Drop your equipment and identify yourselves. The reaction was immediate. Ellis spun toward the light, momentarily raising an arm to shield his eyes while the other 2 men froze in mid-action. From the opposite direction, Montgomery's flashlight suddenly illuminated the scene from another angle, creating a crossfire of light that left no shadows in which to hide. Jesus Christ, Ellis swore, recognizing the tactical disadvantage of being caught in dual light sources. His hand moved instinctively toward his hip before he registered Sarah's identity. Mrs. Blackwood, this is an unexpected surprise. Not as surprising as finding a county deputy trespassing on my land at midnight, Sarah replied, maintaining her position and keeping the light directed at his face. With an unauthorized search party, no less. Ellis attempted to regain composure, adopting an official demeanor despite being caught in blatant misconduct. We received reports of suspicious activity in this area, just checking it out as part of regular patrol. With metal detectors and shovels, Sarah asked, her tone making clear she wasn't accepting the transparent lie. And without approaching the property owner first, that's not how law enforcement operates, deputy. Not legitimate law enforcement anyway. Montgomery had approached the other two men, who wisely remained still under his scrutiny. Evening, Vince. Michael. Interesting choice of nighttime recreation. Michael Whitmore, a man in his 30s with the studied intensity of an academic and the physical build of someone who rarely engaged in manual labor, straightened indignantly. We have historical reason to believe this area contains artifacts related to the territorial period. As representatives of the Historical Society, "You're not here in any official capacity," Montgomery interrupted firmly. "And you know it. Eleanora would never authorize midnight excavations on private property." Ellis attempted to reassert control of the situation. "Look, this is all a misunderstanding. We're simply conducting preliminary research for potential historical designation of this area. If significant artifacts are discovered, proper procedures would of course be followed. Those proper procedures begin with landowner permission and archaeological oversight." Sarah countered, unmoved. "Not secretive trespassing and unauthorized removal of artifacts." She gestured toward a small pile of items they had already excavated, what appeared to be rusted metal implements and fragments of pottery. "Everything you've removed from this soil remains my property. Return it immediately, then leave. We can discuss your interest in historical research during daylight hours and through appropriate channels." Ellis's expression hardened, the pretense of official business dropping away. "You don't understand what you've stumbled into, Mrs. Blackwood. This property and what it contains has significance beyond your recent purchase agreement. There are historical claims and interests that predate your ownership." "Legal ownership is quite clear," Sarah replied evenly, "as is the law regarding trespassing and theft. Your badge doesn't exempt you from either, Deputy Ellis." A tense silence followed, the balance of power shifting visibly as Ellis recognized the untenable nature of his position. Being reported for trespassing and attempted theft would end his law enforcement career, regardless of whatever historical justification he believed supported his actions. "We'll go," he finally conceded, gesturing for his companions to gather their equipment. "But this isn't finished. What's buried here has connections to multiple families in this county, families that have waited generations for the truth to emerge." "Then they can approach me respectfully and legally," Sarah responded. "Midnight excavations won't be tolerated again. I'll be installing security measures throughout the property effective immediately." As the three men collected their tools and the items they had unearthed, Montgomery moved closer to Sarah, speaking quietly. "They've been digging in the exact location marked on your map. Either they have similar documentation, or they've somehow seen what you found." Sarah nodded slightly, having noted the same correlation. "The Historical Society breach, you mentioned the documents that were improperly digitized. They must have included references to this location." They watched in silence as Ellis and his companions loaded their vehicle and departed the SUV's taillights, soon disappearing down the dirt track toward the main road. Only when the sound of the engine had faded completely did Sarah lower her flashlight. "They'll be back," Montgomery predicted grimly. "Maybe not those three specifically, but others. The rumors about what's buried here have circulated for generations. Your arrival and the renovations you're undertaking have intensified local interest." Sarah surveyed the scattered holes and disturbed earth left by the hasty excavation. "Then we need to find whatever's here before they do. Not for the monetary value, but to ensure the historical context is properly preserved." Montgomery studied her with newfound respect. Most people would be focused on the gold itself. "I'm not most people," Sarah replied simply. "And I've learned enough in the past few days to understand that this isn't just about a lost treasure. It's about an alternate historical narrative that powerful interests have suppressed for nearly 150 years. That matters more than gold coins, regardless of their value." They walked together toward the house, the confrontation with the trespassers having crystallized Sarah's resolve. Rancho Escondido had chosen her as Maria Gutierrez had suggested. Now she needed to honor that choice by uncovering and protecting the truth it had guarded for so long. Dawn broke over the desert with characteristic southwestern drama, the eastern sky painted in vivid oranges and pinks that gradually gave way to the intense blue that would dominate the day. Sarah had slept little after the confrontation with Ellis and his companions, her mind working through implications and plans, while her body remained alert to any sounds that might indicate returned trespassers. The children had accepted her abbreviated explanation of the previous night's events with the resilience that had become their hallmark through years of uncertainty. Thomas particularly seemed to understand the significance of what they had discovered, his natural interest in history, providing context for the artifacts and their importance beyond potential monetary value. After breakfast, Sarah spread the two maps on the kitchen table, along with her notes from the Historical Society archives and the specialized equipment James Reynolds had provided. "We need to conduct a systematic exploration," she explained to Montgomery, who had returned early that morning as promised. "Not just the area by the creek where Ellis was digging, but the entire tunnel system. Whatever Frank Miller and Billy the Kid concealed here was meant to be found eventually, but only by someone who could piece together the complete puzzle, not just extract isolated components." Montgomery nodded agreement, examining the maps with a civil engineer's practiced eye. "The tunnel layout suggests multiple access points," he observed, tracing the indicated passages with a weathered finger. "The main entrance we found behind the bookcase, but there appear to be at least 3 secondary entrances, one near the creek, one in what's now the eastern field, and one that seems to connect to the old well house." Sarah noted his expertise with increased appreciation. "Were you involved in tunnel construction during your military service?" "Specialized in infrastructure assessment," Montgomery confirmed. "Spent most of my tour evaluating Viet Cong tunnel complexes for structural integrity before our troops entered them. Same principles apply here, though these were built with different techniques and for different purposes." He pointed to specific notations on the house map. "These markings indicate reinforced sections areas where extra support was added to prevent collapse. And these," he indicated different symbols, "appear to show ventilation systems. Whoever designed this was thinking long-term, not just creating a temporary hideout." Frank Miller had resources and education beyond the average rancher, Sarah noted, recalling details from the Historical Society records. His journal mentioned consulting mining engineers about improvements to the root cellar. He was creating a sophisticated underground complex disguised as typical frontier architecture. Thomas entered the kitchen, immediately drawn to the map spread across the table. "Are we going to explore the tunnels today?" he asked, excitement overriding his usual morning lethargy. Sarah exchanged a glance with Montgomery, who gave a slight nod of professional assessment. "We'll begin a limited exploration," she decided, "but with strict safety protocols. Mr. Montgomery has experience with underground structures, and we have proper equipment now." "Can I come?" Thomas asked eagerly. Sarah considered the request carefully. Her protective instinct argued against exposing her son to potential dangers, but she also recognized the educational value and the importance of shared discovery. Thomas had demonstrated remarkable maturity throughout their recent challenges, and including him acknowledged that contribution. "You can accompany us for the initial section that's already been assessed as stable," she compromised, "with proper safety equipment and under specific instructions. Emma stays above ground with walkie-talkie contact." Thomas accepted these conditions with understanding beyond his years, recognizing both the privilege being extended and its limitations. Preparations proceeded methodically throughout the morning. Sarah installed motion-activated security cameras covering the property's perimeter, with particular attention to the creek area where Ellis had been digging. Montgomery inspected the known tunnel entrance, checking support beams and air quality before declaring it safe for initial exploration. By early afternoon, they were ready. Emma, thoroughly briefed on emergency procedures and equipped with a walkie-talkie, was stationed in the kitchen, with assignments to maintain regular communication checks. Sarah, Thomas, and Montgomery gathered in the hidden basement room, each wearing hard hats with mounted lights carrying additional flashlights and equipped with the specialized monitoring devices Reynolds had provided. "Stay between us at all times," Sarah instructed Thomas as Montgomery operated the release mechanism that swung the bookcase open. "Touch nothing without asking first. If either of us says retreat, you turn and move back immediately without question." Understood. Thomas nodded solemnly, his expression reflecting appropriate seriousness despite his obvious excitement. Yes, ma'am. The tunnel entrance revealed itself exactly as Sarah had first discovered it, an arched passage approximately 6 feet high and 4 feet wide, reinforced with timber supports and extending into darkness beyond the reach of their lights. The air that flowed from the opening carried the scent of earth and ancient wood, but registered normal oxygen levels on the monitoring equipment. I'll take point. Montgomery offered his military background evident in the terminology. You cover the rear, Thomas between us. Sarah nodded agreement, appreciating his professional approach. With deliberate movements, Montgomery entered the tunnel, his headlamp illuminating the passage ahead, while he maintained verbal commentary on conditions. Support structures appear sound. No visible water damage or significant deterioration. Ceiling height consistent with original construction. Thomas followed his own light, sweeping the walls with undisguised fascination. The wooden beams are hand-hewn, he observed with surprising technical accuracy. Not milled lumber. You can see the adze marks. Sarah brought up the rear, impressed by her son's observation, while maintaining vigilant awareness of their surroundings. The tunnel proceeded straight for approximately 30 feet before reaching a junction where the passage split in 3 directions. Montgomery paused, consulting the map Sarah had provided. According to this, the left passage leads toward the creek area, the right toward the eastern field, and the center continues deeper under the main house. Which way first? Thomas asked, his voice hushed in the enclosed space. Sarah considered the options, correlating the map locations with what they had already discovered. The creek passage, she decided. That's where Ellis was digging, corresponding to the main reserve notation on the second map. Let's see what they were so determined to find. Montgomery nodded agreement, turning into the left passage, which immediately began to slope gently downward. The construction remained consistent, sturdy timber supports at regular intervals, packed earth floors, and the remnants of what appeared to be an ancient electrical conduit running along one wall. Frank Miller was ahead of his time, Montgomery commented, noting the conduit. Electricity was rare in rural New Mexico in the 1880s, especially in underground installations. The journal mentioned William providing funds for improvements from his banking transactions, Sarah recalled. If that referred to Billy the Kid's robbery proceeds, Miller had resources beyond the typical rancher's means. They continued in silence for another 50 feet, the passage maintaining its gradual descent until Montgomery stopped abruptly, raising a hand in a military signal for caution. Floor disturbance ahead. He reported, his light focused on the ground where the previously smooth-packed earth showed signs of recent disruption. Someone's been digging here, and not carefully. Sarah moved forward to examine the area, keeping Thomas safely behind her. The tunnel floor had indeed been excavated in several places, creating hazardous holes and weakening the surrounding structure. More concerning, one of the support beams showed damage, compromising its integrity. Ellis and his friends have been inside the tunnel system, she concluded grimly. Not just digging at the surface near the creek. They found another entrance. Montgomery nodded, his expression reflecting professional concern. And they've created structural hazards in the process. This support beam needs reinforcement before we proceed further. Could the whole tunnel collapse? Thomas asked, a hint of anxiety entering his voice for the first time. Not immediately, Montgomery assured him, but continued disturbance without proper engineering oversight could eventually trigger localized failures. Whoever did this was being reckless. Sarah made a quick decision, balancing curiosity against safety. We'll mark this section for repair and return with proper materials. For now, let's check the center passage. According to the map, it should lead to a larger chamber beneath the main house. When they backtracked to the junction, Montgomery noting specific measurements and damage assessments for later repair. The center passage proved narrower than the first, requiring them to proceed in single file, with shoulders occasionally brushing the earthen walls. After approximately 40 feet, the tunnel widened, suddenly opening into a chamber that caused all 3 explorers to stop in collective amazement. The space before them was approximately 20 feet square, its ceiling supported by substantial timber beams arranged in a careful grid pattern. Unlike the rough-hewn tunnel passages, this chamber showed evidence of deliberate finishing. The earthen walls had been reinforced with wooden planking in places, and the floor was partially bricked rather than packed dirt. Most remarkably, the chamber contained furniture. A small wooden desk against one wall, Shelves lined with decaying books and papers. In what appeared to be a narrow cot frame, its fabric components long since deteriorated to dust. "It's a hidden office," Thomas whispered, his light playing across the preserved scene. "Like a secret headquarters. More like a bolt hole." Montgomery assessed professional experience informing his interpretation. "Somewhere a person could remain for extended periods, if necessary, with basic comforts and working space." Sarah approached the desk carefully, noting the objects still arranged on its surface. An ancient inkwell, rusted pen nibs, what appeared to be a ledger book bound in cracked leather, and several small metal containers, whose contents were not immediately identifiable. "This is exactly as someone left it," she observed quietly, "undisturbed for over a century. No evidence that Ellis or others have found this chamber," Montgomery confirmed, examining the tunnel entrance for signs of recent passage. "The dust patterns are consistent with long-term abandonment, not recent visitation." Sarah carefully opened the ledger book, its binding crackling with age, but remaining intact. The pages revealed meticulous, handwriting columns of figures and notations spanning from January 1881 through December 1882. Unlike the personal journal they had previously discovered, this was clearly a financial record documenting expenses, investments, and what appeared to be the systematic distribution of significant funds. "It's an accounting of the gold," she realized, scanning entries that referenced deposits, transfers, and security allocations. Not just record keeping, but active management of whatever was taken from the Lincoln County shipment. Montgomery examined the shelved books, many of which had deteriorated beyond legibility. "Some of these appear to be legal texts," he noted. "Property law, banking regulations. The tools someone would need to transform questionable assets into legitimate holdings." Billy the Kid was reinventing himself. Sarah concluded, the evidence before them supporting the theory that Reynolds had proposed. Using this hidden chamber to manage the transition from outlaw to respectable businessman. Thomas, meanwhile, had discovered something else, a small metal box tucked beneath the cot frame. "Mom, look at this," he called, his light illuminating the tarnished container. Sarah joined him, examining the box without touching it. Unlike the roughly functional containers they had found previously, this one showed craftsmanship, brass fittings, decorative engraving, and a small lock mechanism that had long since corroded. "Let's see what's inside," she decided carefully, lifting the box and placing it on the desk where they could all examine the contents. The lock, weakened by age, yielded to gentle pressure. Inside, nestled on what had once been velvet, but was now compressed to thin fabric, lay several items: a pocket watch with an ornate gold chain, a signet ring bearing an unfamiliar crest, and a small leather folder containing what appeared to be identification documents. Sarah opened the folder delicately, revealing papers brittle with age but still legible. The first was a banking license issued to William Miller by the Colorado Territorial Banking Commission, dated 1882. The second was a deed to property in Denver, similarly issued to William Miller. The third was a letter of introduction from Franklin Miller of Lincoln County to business associates in the Colorado Territory, recommending his cousin William for consideration in financial ventures. Most significantly, tucked behind these official documents was a small tintype photograph, a formal portrait of a man in business attire, his features unmistakably those of the infamous outlaw known as Billy the Kid, though now sporting a neatly trimmed beard and the sober expression of a respectable businessman. "It's him," Thomas breathed, recognition immediate, despite having seen only the famous historical photographs of the outlaw. "Billy the Kid, after he was supposed to be dead." "William Miller," Sarah corrected gently, "banking professional of Denver, Colorado. This is physical evidence of the transformation, the documented creation of a new identity." Montgomery's expression reflected profound appreciation for the historical significance of their discovery. "This isn't just confirmation that Billy the Kid survived, it's the actual mechanism of his reinvention. The official document is the chamber where he worked during the transition, the accounting of funds that financed his new life." Sarah carefully replaced the items in the box, her military training automatically assessing their evidential value and security requirements. "This needs proper preservation and documentation," she decided, "not just for historical accuracy, but for legal protection. If Ellis and others are searching this aggressively, we need to ensure these artifacts are properly secured and their provenance established." Thomas, meanwhile, had continued exploring the chamber, his methodical examination revealing additional details. "Mom, there's something behind this shelf," he called, indicating where one of the book units appeared to stand slightly away from the wall. Montgomery moved to assist his light, revealing a narrow gap between the shelving and the earthen wall. "Another hidden compartment," he confirmed. These frontier hideouts often had multiple concealment layers, secrets behind secrets. Together, they carefully moved the shelving unit, revealing a small alcove carved into the wall behind. Unlike the office chamber with its practical functionality, this space had clearly been designed for secure storage. A miniature vault with a metal-reinforced door that now stood partially ajar, its lock mechanism having failed over the decades. Sarah directed her light into the opening, revealing the contents that Ellis and his companions had been so determined to locate. Stacked inside the small vault were canvas bags, their fabric deteriorated but still containing their original contents. Gold coins, hundreds of them arranged in neat rows and labeled with faded tags. The Lincoln County Gold. Montgomery breathed the significance of their discovery evident in his tone. At least part of it, the main reserve referenced on the map. Sarah examined the cache without touching it, estimating its value based on what was visible. "There must be several $1,000s in period gold here," she assessed, "worth considerably more now, both as precious metal and as numismatic artifacts with historical provenance." "Are we rich?" Thomas asked the child in him, momentarily overriding the young historian. Sarah smiled slightly, understanding the natural reaction. "The legal situation is complicated," she explained. "This technically qualifies as a treasure trove found on private property, which generally belongs to the landowner U.S. But its historical significance and the circumstances of its original acquisition create ethical and potentially legal complications." Montgomery nodded agreement, not to mention the practical challenges of suddenly appearing with a fortune in historical gold coins without documented provenance. The IRS tends to ask pointed questions about such windfalls. Thomas absorbed this perspective with characteristic thoughtfulness. So it's not just about finding treasure, it's about handling it responsibly. "Exactly," Sarah confirmed, proud of his mature understanding, "which is why proper documentation and expert consultation are essential before decisions about disposition." She carefully closed the vault door, ensuring it was secure but not disturbing the contents. "We found what Ellis was searching for, but in the process discovered something far more valuable, historically concrete evidence that the official account of Billy the Kid's death was fabricated, allowing him to establish a new identity as William Miller of Denver. The Historical Society needs to document this properly," Montgomery suggested. "Maria Gutierrez would ensure the significance is properly recorded. But Sheriff Cooper and Deputy Ellis would have different priorities." Sarah noted the practical security challenges becoming increasingly apparent, not to mention the Whitmore family and others with historical claims or interests. They conducted a final survey of the chamber, noting additional details for future documentation before beginning their return journey to the surface. The exploration had yielded far more than Sarah had anticipated, not just confirming local legends about hidden gold, but providing tangible evidence of an historical deception that had persisted for nearly 150 years. As they emerged from the tunnel system into the basement room, the contrast between the hidden historical chamber and the mundane reality of a house under renovation seemed almost jarring. Emma's excited questions about their discoveries brought them fully back to the present, the family dynamic reasserting itself after hours of historical investigation. "We found a secret room and gold coins and proof that Billy the Kid didn't really die when the history books say he did," Thomas reported to his sister, his summary both accurate and calibrated to capture a 9-year-old's interest. "Real gold?" Emma asked, eyes widening with appropriate appreciation for treasure. "Real gold," Sarah confirmed, "but more importantly, real history that's been hidden for generations. Sometimes the truth is more valuable than treasure." Montgomery excused himself shortly afterward, promising to return with materials to reinforce the damaged section of tunnel and suggesting a meeting with Maria Gutierrez to discuss proper documentation of their discoveries. His departure left Sarah alone with her children and the growing responsibility of managing not just a renovation project, but a significant historical find. That evening, after the children were asleep, Sarah sat on the front porch, the desert night spread before her in star-studded splendor. The profound quiet allowed for reflection on how dramatically her circumstances had changed in less than a week. The desperate gamble on an affordable property had transformed into stewardship of historical artifacts, potentially worth millions, in evidence that could rewrite a cornerstone of American frontier mythology. The sound of an approaching vehicle interrupted her thoughts. Headlights appeared on the access road, moving steadily toward the ranch house without attempt at concealment. Sarah's hand moved instinctively toward the sidearm she'd begun keeping within reach, though she left it holstered as the vehicle, a Sheriff's Department SUV, pulled into the yard and parked. Sheriff Harlan Cooper stepped out, his uniform immaculate despite the late hour, his movements deliberate as he approached the porch. Unlike his previous daytime visit with its pretense of casual welcome, his demeanor now was frankly official. "Mrs. Blackwood," he greeted her, removing his hat with formal courtesy. "I apologize for the late hour, but certain matters have come to my attention that require immediate discussion." Sarah remained seated, maintaining the higher ground position, both literally and figuratively. "Sheriff Cooper, this is becoming a pattern. Is there a reason county law enforcement seems unusually interested in my property?" Cooper's expression tightened almost imperceptibly before he manufactured a professional smile. "May I?" he asked, gesturing toward the porch steps. Sarah nodded permission, observing his movements with military assessment, the practiced casualness that failed to entirely mask tension, the calculated positioning that kept his right side and sidearm slightly away from her direct line of approach. "I understand there was an incident on your property last night," Cooper began once he had settled on the step, placing his hat beside him with careful precision. "Trespassers near the creek." "Interesting that you're aware of that," Sarah replied evenly, "since I didn't report it to your department." Cooper's smile remained fixed, though his eyes hardened slightly. "Small community. Information travels." "Yes, it seems to," Sarah agreed, "particularly information about what might be buried on my property. Your Deputy Ellis, I believe, seemed to have very specific ideas about where to dig." The direct confrontation caused a momentary flash of surprise across Cooper's features before his professional mask reasserted itself. "Deputy Ellis was operating without departmental authorization if he was on your property." He stated the careful phrasing, creating distance without actual denial of knowledge. "He was in uniform," Sarah noted, "armed, accompanied by two local men with excavation equipment, conducting a systematic search using what appeared to be prior intelligence about specific locations." While Cooper sighed, apparently recognizing that pretense would be counterproductive. "Mrs. Blackwood, you've purchased property with complicated local history. History that matters deeply to several families in this county, including mine. The lost Lincoln County gold," Sarah supplied directly, "and the alternative account of Billy the Kid's fate. Your family has maintained the official version for generations, I understand." Cooper's surprise at her direct knowledge was more pronounced this time. "You've been doing your research," he observed, reassessing her with newfound wariness. "The Historical Society has been informative," Sarah acknowledged, "as have certain artifacts discovered during renovation." "Maria Gutierrez has her own perspective," Cooper replied carefully, "shaped by family loyalties that don't necessarily align with documented history." "Documented by whom?" Sarah asked pointedly. "History is written by those with the power to record it, Sheriff. Sometimes alternative accounts preserved through family traditions prove more accurate than official records." Cooper studied her for a long moment, tactical assessment evident in his gaze. "You've found something," he concluded, "something significant enough to make you challenge the established historical record." Sarah neither confirmed nor denied, allowing silence to maintain her informational advantage. "Whatever you've discovered belongs in proper institutional custody." Cooper continued, shifting to a different approach. "The county historical preservation statutes give my department authority to secure significant historical artifacts for public benefit. After proper archaeological assessment and documentation," Sarah corrected, "by qualified experts with no personal interest in the outcome. Your department's involvement would represent a clear conflict of interest given your family's historical position." Cooper's expression hardened, the pretense of cordial discussion fading. "Mrs. Blackwood, I don't think you appreciate the complexity of the situation you have inserted yourself into. This isn't just about historical curiosity or even valuable artifacts. There are reputations and legacies at stake, generations of carefully maintained narratives that serve important community purposes, including your great-grandfather's reputation as the business partner of Lawrence Murphy, Sarah noted, recalling Maria's information, a primary antagonist in the Lincoln County War, an enemy of Billy the Kid. Cooper stood abruptly, his posture stiffening with barely contained anger. You're making dangerous assumptions based on incomplete information provided by biased sources. As sheriff, I have a responsibility to secure historical artifacts of significant public value. As a property owner, I have legal rights regarding discoveries made during good faith renovation. Sarah countered, remaining seated but fully alert to the escalating tension. Rights I intend to exercise with appropriate professional consultation, not selective law enforcement oversight. For a moment, Cooper seemed to consider more forceful measures, his hand unconsciously shifting toward his sidearm before professional training reasserted control. This conversation isn't finished, he stated flatly. I'll be returning with appropriate documentation regarding the county's historical preservation requirements. In the meantime, I strongly advise against any further excavation or removal of artifacts. He retrieved his hat with a sharp movement and returned to his vehicle. Without further exchange, the SUV's departure marked by unnecessarily aggressive acceleration that sent gravel spraying from beneath the tires. Sarah remained on the porch long after the taillights had disappeared, her military experience automatically analyzing the confrontation and its implications for future security. Cooper's reaction confirmed that her discoveries threatened established interests, not just historical narratives, but contemporary power structures built upon those accepted versions of the past. The lost Lincoln County gold represented not just material value, but potential revelation of historical deceptions that multiple local families had maintained for generations. If Billy the Kid had not died as officially recorded, if Pat Garrett had participated in a deliberate fabrication, if the stolen gold had financed a new identity for the notorious outlaw, these revelations would undermine foundational elements of local and even national historical understanding. Sarah's phone vibrated with an incoming text message from Richard Montgomery. Meeting arranged with Maria tomorrow, 10 a.m. at Historical Society. Bringing university expert. Reinforcement materials acquired for tunnel repair. The message confirmed that allies were mobilizing to properly document and preserve her discoveries. The confrontation with Cooper had only strengthened her resolve to ensure that whatever historical truth lay buried at Rancho Escondido would finally emerge into proper light, not as sensationalized treasure hunting, but as careful documented historical reassessment. The meeting at the Historical Society the following morning brought together an unlikely coalition of interests. Maria Gutierrez presided with the dignity of her position as chief archivist, her formal attire and precise movements establishing the scholarly tone of the gathering. Richard Montgomery contributed practical engineering expertise regarding the tunnel system's structural integrity and preservation requirements. James Reynolds added his extensive knowledge of frontier artifacts and authentication methodologies. Most significantly, Dr. Robert Harrison, professor of Western American history from the State University, provided academic credibility and institutional backing for the documentation process. A tall, rangy man in his early 60s with the weathered complexion of someone who conducted fieldwork rather than merely theoretical research, Harrison brought scholarly perspective to what might otherwise have been dismissed as treasure hunting. The potential historical significance cannot be overstated, he explained after examining photographs of the hidden chamber and its contents. If authenticated, these artifacts would constitute the most significant revision to the Billy the Kid narrative since the original events themselves. Sarah had shared selected information about her discoveries, carefully balancing transparency against security concerns given Sheriff Cooper's explicit interest. The hidden chamber, the business documents establishing Billy the Kid's new identity as William Miller, and the accounting ledgers documenting the transformation of stolen gold into legitimate business capital, these elements painted a compelling picture of historical deception maintained across generations. The university would be prepared to provide comprehensive documentation services, Harrison continued. Professional photography, artifact, preservation, archival scanning of documents, and eventual publication in peer-reviewed historical journals. What about the gold itself? Reynolds asked, addressing the practical question that underlaid the academic considerations. That creates security and legal complications beyond historical documentation. Harrison nodded, acknowledging the issue's complexity. Typically, treasure trove law assigns ownership to the property owner, in this case, Mrs. Blackwood. However, the historical significance and the circumstances of its original acquisition create potential complications. There are also local claims to consider. Maria added, her tone measured but firm. Multiple families maintain historical connections to these events and artifacts. Sarah had considered this aspect carefully since the confrontation with Cooper. I'm not interested in personal enrichment from historical artifacts, she stated, her decision having crystallized overnight. My priority is ensuring proper historical documentation and preservation. She outlined the approach she had developed. 25% of any monetary value would be dedicated to establishing a historical preservation fund for Lincoln County administered by qualified trustees without political appointment. 30% would support my family's continued restoration of Rancho Escondido as a historical site. 25% would establish an academic research fund at the State University for Frontier History Studies. The remaining 20% would create a community foundation benefiting local educational programs. Her proposal created momentary silence, its generosity and comprehensive vision exceeding expectations. Dr. Harrison recovered first professional appreciation evident in his expression. That's remarkably thoughtful distribution, he acknowledged. Balancing historical preservation, academic research, community benefit, and your family's legitimate interests as its property owners and discoverers. It would require legal structuring to ensure proper implementation, Maria noted practically, and potential challenges from parties claiming historical interest would need resolution. Like Sheriff Cooper and the Whitmore family, Montgomery added, the concern implicit in his tone. That's why proper documentation and institutional involvement are essential, Sarah explained. This isn't about personal possession, but historical truth. The discoveries at Rancho Escondido don't belong to any single individual or family. They're part of American historical record that's been obscured for nearly 150 years. The meeting concluded with practical arrangements for professional documentation to begin the following day. Dr. Harrison would return with university specialists in historical artifact preservation photography and document archiving. Montgomery would oversee structural reinforcement of the tunnel system to ensure safe access for the documentation team. Reynolds would coordinate security measures to protect the property during this process. As the group dispersed, Maria Gutierrez remained behind, her dark eyes studying Sarah with contemplative assessment. You've surprised them, the elderly archivist observed once they were alone. They expected treasure hunting motivation, not historical preservation principles. Sarah smiled slightly, recognizing the accurate perception. Military service changes perspective, she explained. Material value becomes less important than enduring legacy. Maria nodded, satisfaction evident in her expression. I told you Rancho Escondido chose you, she reminded Sarah. Now we see why. The house needed someone who would value truth above gold. The following weeks transformed Rancho Escondido from an isolated renovation project to a controlled historical excavation site. University experts meticulously documented each discovery, photographing artifacts in situ, before careful removal for preservation, scanning fragile documents, before placing them in archival storage, mapping the tunnel system with laser precision to create three-dimensional models for future study. The hidden chamber yielded additional evidence beyond initial discoveries. Behind a false wall section, researchers found a small metal tube containing a handwritten account by Billy the Kid himself, a personal narrative explaining his decision to abandon the outlaw life and create a new identity with Frank Miller's assistance. The document provided first-hand perspective on events that had been recorded only through official accounts or folklore, including his version of what had actually occurred at Fort Sumner in 1881. According to this account, Pat Garrett had indeed shot someone that night, but not Billy the Kid. The victim had been an unfortunate ranch hand with similar build, deliberately misidentified to allow the real Billy to escape. Garrett's participation in the deception had been secured through financial arrangement, with the sheriff achieving fame as the man who killed Billy the Kid while actually facilitating his escape. DNA testing of preserved hair samples found in the pocket watch case, compared against known descendants of Billy the Kid's mother, confirmed familial connection with the historical figure, lending scientific credibility to the documentation's authenticity. Financial records established clear connection between the stolen Lincoln County gold and the initial capitalization of William Miller's banking ventures in Colorado. Most dramatically, excavation near the creek, the area where Ellis had been digging, revealed a small, previously undocumented burial site. Forensic examination identified the remains as those of the actual victim at Fort Sumner, the man whose death had been misreported as Billy the Kid's. A simple marker stone bore only the initials JB and the date July 14, 1881. Sheriff Cooper attempted legal intervention when the scope of discoveries became apparent, filing for court orders to suspend excavation under historical preservation statutes. However, the university's involvement in Dr. Harrison's academic standing provided institutional protection that even local judicial connections couldn't overcome. When state archaeological authorities became involved, Cooper's opposition was effectively neutralized by higher jurisdictional authority. The gold itself, approximately $23,000 in period coins distributed across 3 separate caches, was properly inventoried, authenticated, and secured in institutional custody pending final disposition according to Sarah's proposed distribution plan. Its current value, considering both precious metal content and historical significance, was conservatively estimated at $3.4 million. Throughout this process, the children adapted to their unusual circumstances with remarkable resilience. Thomas became an unofficial assistant to the university team, his natural historical interest and growing knowledge making him a valuable contributor despite his youth. Emma found her own role documenting the process through surprisingly skilled photography, her natural artistic eye capturing elements that formal documentation sometimes missed. By early autumn, the initial documentation phase was complete. Rancho Escondido's secrets had been professionally recorded, its historical significance established beyond reasonable dispute. The official narrative of Billy the Kid's death was conclusively disproven, replaced by documented evidence of his reinvention as William Miller and subsequent legitimate business career in Colorado. On a crisp October evening, Sarah sat on the newly restored front porch with James Reynolds watching the sunset paint the desert landscape in spectacular golds and reds. The house behind them had been transformed, structural issues addressed, period details, restored modern systems, carefully integrated to preserve historical character while providing contemporary functionality. "It's coming together nicely," Reynolds observed, his appreciation for craftsmanship evident in his tone. "You've honored the history while making it livable." Sarah nodded satisfaction, warming her expression as she surveyed their progress. "The children are finally settled. Thomas starts at the local school next week, and Emma's already made friends with the neighbor's daughter." "And the historical foundation?" Reynolds asked, referring to the legal entity established to implement Sarah's distribution plan for the discovered artifacts and gold. "Fully structured and operational," she confirmed. "Dr. Harrison has agreed to chair the academic committee with Maria, providing local historical oversight. The university begins cataloging the complete collection next month for eventual public exhibition." Reynolds smiled, genuine pleasure in his expression. "From desperate housing search to historical preservation, pioneer in 6 months. Not a transformation many could manage successfully." Sarah's thoughts turned to the parallel historical narrative they had uncovered: Billy the Kid's reinvention from notorious outlaw to respected businessman. "Sometimes circumstances force unexpected changes," she observed. "The measure of character is how we adapt to those necessities." The sound of Thomas's voice called from inside, announcing dinner readiness with teenage enthusiasm. As Sarah rose to join her family, she took a final appreciative glance at the property stretching before her. The land that had chosen her as Maria Gutierrez had suggested to reveal its long-buried secrets. Rancho Escondido had transformed from desperate last resort to permanent home, its historical significance now properly documented and preserved for future generations. The lost Lincoln County gold had finally fulfilled its purpose, not as personal wealth, but as catalyst for historical truth and community benefit. As for Billy the Kid, William H. Bonney, who became William Merrill Miller, his actual fate had finally emerged from historical shadow. Not the dramatic death of frontier legend, but the successful reinvention that American mythology so often celebrated, the outlaw who ultimately found legitimate purpose through determination and opportunity. Sarah entered the house, closing the door on gathering desert darkness while embracing the light and warmth of the home she had created, a home built not just of adobe and timber, but of historical significance and newfound purpose. its foundations now extending deep into both the physical earth and the rich soil of American frontier history. The desert sun sets on Rancho Escondido, much as it did a century and a half ago, painting the adobe walls in hues of gold and crimson. History, like the land itself, reveals its truths only to those patient enough to listen, brave enough to dig, and wise enough to understand what they've unearthed. Sarah Blackwood came to these parched acres, searching only for shelter, a roof over her children's heads and walls to keep out the wind. Instead, she found herself guardian to a truth that generations of powerful men had labored to bury. The lost Lincoln County gold now serves a purpose its thieves never intended, preserving history rather than corrupting it. And somewhere in a Denver cemetery beneath a headstone reading William Miller, respected banker, lies the mortal remains of America's most famous outlaw, a man who, like so many in our nation's story, reinvented himself when given the chance. Perhaps that's the real treasure hidden in these tunnels, not the glint of gold coins or the shock of historical revelation, but the quiet reminder that America's frontier spirit never truly died. It lives on in those who question accepted narratives, who seek truth beneath comfortable lies, who build new lives from the ruins of old dreams. Some say the desert holds no more secrets. Those who know better simply smile and wait for the land to whisper again.